The reign of the Hill Giant King has begun. Brohk stalks the expanse, slaughtering and feasting upon unsuspecting towns in the name of Saltauger before disappearing with his warband into the realm's vast, unexplored wilds. The king's mind, though as sharp as butcher's blades, is clouded by delusions of a fanatical higher purpose. Even still, he possesses a level of intelligence unprecedented in his kind, mastering blood magic and other fiendish rituals. With plans to bring forth the ultimate feast of all life, Brohk has amassed a devout group of followers to aid him, his legion of well-trained hill giants hanging on his every word, eager to fill their gullets with the spoils of his conquests. They're not the only ones, however, who follow in his footstep. Fiends that form from the carnage and misery in his wake, vile opportunists which prey on the weak, scavengers that circle above and pick off the hopeless, each with a different reason for their loyalty to the king, each playing their part in the ushering in of abundance. In the few short years since Brohk's rise, word of his vile acts have spread across the realm. The hairless one that walks like man, commanding an army of giants. But surely that couldn't be true. Hill giants are at best rather docile creatures, and at worst, a nuisance to farmers and property owners. In time, however, they were proven wrong. Brohk gained a name for himself through his drastic acts, and the stories of the atrocities he has committed spread like wildfire. Seemingly unstoppable, his ever-looming presence among the expanse has placed its inhabitants on high alert, closing their gates to trade and fortifying their walls, praying to the great spirits they aren't targeted next. The realm's city-states squirm impatiently. Some have been preparing for a moment like this for ages, while others couldn't have been less ready. They sit with bated breath, staring destruction in the face, waiting for the swift final blow. The King of the Giants, however, refrains, opting to grow forces and influence. He craves more than just a handful of nations among the expanse. To satiate his giant hunger, Brohk needs to dominate the whole of Theranor. Of course, a king cannot be everywhere at once. From Theranor's tallest trees to its deepest caverns, Brohk directs blood-cursed Smallfolk, beings who have been bound by the Pact of Hunger, to spread his will in his absence. Only when the world knows and fears the Hill Giant King may they feast in Saltauger's name. Today's video will cover 3 of these heralds of Saltauger, Smallfolk warlocks who have dedicated their lives in a blood pact with the King of the Hill Giants. We'll also introduce the subclass they've inspired, the Pact of the Hunger, and how you could go about using it in your home games. Life in the Expanse was a slow one. Those who reside among or under the grasses savor simpler pleasures. A warm, gentle breeze, the tilling of the fields and the tending to of livestock, dirt under the nails and a hearty meal among family. With reduced hill giant populations in their natural habitats as they continue to follow Brohk, the most stable source of food, the plains are beginning to suffer from ecological consequences. Other scavengers have arrived, succeeding in these areas as they take up the jobs of clearing the land of the dead and dying. They aren't as passive as the giants once were, leading to some conflict. Among them are the plains Gnolls. Before we begin with our first warlock, we need to shout some people in our community out. Our Discord's been absolutely buzzing with talk about Gnolls over the last few weeks. Specifically how people think they might be in Theranor, or how the race might interact with Brohk. Now the hardest thing about creating a world-building project based around D&D is there's a lot of different D&D creatures. Naturally, we can't reimagine every single one, or would be here for a long, long time, and a Theranor adventure setting would never see the light of day. However, we do love when people in our community come up with ideas to fit within the world. And when it comes to Gnolls, our Discord server cooked. A few people from the server put their minds together to develop a doc detailing their concept of Gnolls in Theranor. These deeply spiritual, family-oriented clans which are scattered across the expanse. They ceremonially cook and cannibalize the dead, ensuring their spirits return to the soil. Their work was incredibly inspiring. I wanted to highlight how cool it's been to see this and many of the other ideas found in our Discord take shape in Theranor. They were also kind enough to allow us to share this idea with you guys. If you're interested in reading how they came up with Gnolls, and how to play as a gnoll based on the stat block they made, there's a link in the description you can follow. Sashkur, clan matron of the Steppe Watchers, lived among a pack of gnolls in the Great Expanse. In Theranor, gnolls are a nomadic people who closely follow behind herds of hill giants, scarfing down whatever meat remains from their foraging. Among her group, she was a celebrated figure, a doting matriarch that led her community in ritual prayer to Soltogr, and oversaw the growth of young ones among the pack. She routinely prayed to the spirit of the hills for the resources to keep her family alive in this unforgiving world, as the hill giants often left little for them to survive on. Despite that, anyone who did pass through her territory was welcomed, and was always given a meal. Sashkur led as humble of a life as one could, sacrificing everything she had for her family, including her own body as matron. One night she would go into labor, as she had many times before. The clan had grown accustomed to her pain. A birthing tent that was once full of her packmates in earlier years was now empty, but she viewed this tribulation as part of her leaderly role. In her agony, she could hear the yipes and howls as they were suddenly descended upon by hill giant forces. The clan tucked tail and fled from camp, leaving her and only her behind as their shrieks and howls grew quiet. The shaking of ground would soon stop, the door flap of her tent lifting away to reveal the hill giant king himself. Brohk awaited intently by her bedside, pitying her as her first two-born arrived lifeless. But then, a third, hanging on to life barely and a little smaller than the rest, sparked a sour memory in the hill giant king. As she cradled the bloodied cub, Brohk whispered to her of Soltogr worship, offering her a path forward for both herself and her young son, so that they would never be victims of a false abundance ever again. In a blood ritual, Brohk would channel a wayward spirit of hunger into the newborn cub, Zedek, and Sashkur would become eternally loyal to the king of the hill giants. For this design, in short, we wanted to elicit primal fear from a character archetype that's meant to be comforting, a mother. You look at her and you get the immediate impression that you're being hunted down. She could hardly be a Theranor character if she didn't have a little prehistoric inspiration. So the long-extinct Hyenodon was an obvious choice that inspired the longer snout and a little bit of her coloration. Her garments are a rancid mix of rags, hides, and viscera, and other adornments in dull reds, purples, browns, and greens. Her pauldron is an entire severed horse head, complete with Brock's twisted symbol of Soltogr. Finally, she carries in a sling her young cub, the only of her last litter to survive. The clan matron of the Steppe Watchers is now a fiercely loyal follower of Brohk. This gnoll queen sometimes accompanies him on raids, but often leads her own subgroup of gnolls, fiends, and beasts. She has a very particular and important purpose as a navigator and planner, the hunger spirit in her child acting like a compass, directing Sashkur's every move towards whatever will sate its appetite. It whispers unspeakable cravings to its mother, who is compelled to fulfill them no matter what. The second Brohk follower we'd like to introduce is one that never leaves the Hill Giant King's side. Tender is an exceedingly rare half-hill giant, created through an alchemical experiment, but not by Brock's hand. Caught in the middle of a giant Smallfolk conflict, he found it hard to be accepted by anyone, until he was found by his new family, Brohk's warband. Gantil Dalespring, aspiring wizard working under Mamrin Bazagal, had completed the most ambitious project of her apprenticeship yet when she gave life to a half-hill giant through alchemy. Despite his hulking size, he was surprisingly gentle. In fact, one of the first things he learned to do was hold a teacup, as Gantil loved to teach him the more subtle joys of living. He was quiet and unexpressive, but ever observant, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. He spent his days glued to his creator's side, and despite the odd glance here or there, Gantil was proud of the independence Tender would show as he aged. The young half-giant was a novice in the arcane by his teen years, and in his early 20s gained enough confidence to leave home, running errands for his mother multiple towns over. On one fateful day, he returned to find his hometown destroyed. The wizard tower he lived in his entire life collapsed to rubble, and his mother nowhere to be found. Tender spent the next few years traveling, living among Smallfolk before his unnatural size and appearance would inevitably scare them off. Why did they fear hill giants? Tender's mother had taught him about this part of him, a part she said gave him his gentle kindness. Over time, he grew to detest the Smallfolk, living in the wild as all but his mother showed him hatred and fear. Camping out one day in the expanse, he came upon a rather large horde of hill giants traveling east. He followed them for some time before he was discovered and presented to Brohk. For a reason he couldn't explain, an air about Brohk reminded him of his mother. He thought he could even detect the faintest hint of her scent on the air. Brohk recognized him for his uniqueness, and shared how they're not so different from one another, offering him a place in his ranks where he'll be accepted. Tender learned that Brohk was doing Smallfolk a kindness by offering them up to the Great Spirit, and for that, he agreed to join the warband. Tender's design is one that Lee is super stoked about. His mottled, veinous skin immediately gives the impression that he may be an undead or golem of some kind. He's absolutely a hill giant that phenotypically resembles his hill giant side. We know what his face looks like just as much as you might. His brass mask repeats the long, curved shapes of the toothy adornments on his head and armor, and his mask communicates a rage that very few could understand. His signature maul doubles as a meat tenderizer, which you might get that impression from with the little protrusions on the head of the weapon. Tender had an incredibly captivating design, so much so I wanted to try modeling it, even though it's something I've never really done before. There was definitely a lot of learning curves, especially the anatomy and the gorilloid features that he exhibits, but at the end of the day, I think it came out really, really well. I think one of my favorite parts of modeling this was actually his maul. One of the first things I've ever modeled before was a club, just to show that maybe it's something I could try doing. And now that I had a bit more experience, everything kind of just clicked, and this maul I think came out looking really, really well. Lee touched up the final bits of Tender's design, and now here he is, ready to print. If you're interested in possibly printing Tender, you could find this model on our Patreon. Tender now follows Brohk and his warband, preparing his meals and dutifully rationing supplies for his army. Despite his new duties, Tender is still the same kind and naive soul, a part of him wishing for a life of peace, study, and afternoon tea like he once had. Unlike our last two warlocks, this final Brohk follower does not flaunt his worship publicly. Wenrisero, Astraladis, once a noble from the Titan trees, now spends his days preying upon Sardonis' struggling populace, converting the city from the shadows, and basking in his own depravity. Humble woofid farmers from Estoril, the Astraladis elves have spent generations establishing themselves among the Titan trees, much of this time spent skirting by, selling woofid meat and fuzz of varying quality on the search for the perfect bug. After centuries of back-breaking labor, the name Astraladis would soon become synonymous with the hardy, healthy bugs they carefully reared, and the dense, high-quality fuzz they could produce. Every guard's uniform from scout to knight across the trees was lined with Astraladis wool, and thousands of pounds of the fuzz was shipped off weekly to distant lands. With how prominent the name had become, it was a surprise to no one when Wenrisero, the youngest of four and last in line to inherit the family business, made his debut in politics, finding himself in the rather important position of Esteril's trade ambassador and overseer of commerce, despite his complete lack of experience. Finally, a role of prestige and prominence, one not to be undermined by bullish older siblings, one where Wenrisero can finally feel big. Such a position, however, has never made him feel smaller. There were hundreds of reports of lost and pillaged goods from across Theranor. Caravans smashed by hungry hill and raging frost giants. Flocks of woofids escaping transport, snapped up by fire giant hatchlings and collected and protected by stone giants. Sometimes entire fleets of ships carrying the prized wool were lost, sunk by cyclones. Worst of all was the prying mandibles of cloud giants, seeking to collect debts apparently inherited from his predecessor. Once more bullied by someone larger, Wenrisero would eventually need to flee his position, having been caught skimming funds from the city's export revenue. Traveling to Sardanis with a fortune in tow, the young noble used his funds to construct a manor of elvish design, seeing as he likely would never step foot in the trees again. The Moon Willow, as he called it, was home now, and it quickly became a place where the elf could wallow in his unrestrained hatred for giant kind. As decades passed, the Moon Willow soon became a place where nobles in Sardanis could experience the awe of the Titan trees from the comforts of their home city, for an exorbitant fee, of course. Wenrisero would come to amass a collection of giant-made items, not by, but of. Segments of cloud giant hive decorated his woofid fuzz and frost giant leather cloak. Around his neck, jewelry made of hill giant teeth, and a shawl sewn together from fire giant hatchling tails. Sitting upon a throne of fire giant scrap and frost giant tusks, Wenrisero could admire his hoard, forever guarded by a taxidermied bull hill giant. Among his most prized possessions, however, was Off, the remains of a stone giant sat atop a pedestal in his collection. Once Wenrisero heard tale of a hairless hill giant, he promptly hired poachers to retrieve the giant's hide. Come their return some weeks later, the last thing the noble expected was to be knocked unconscious. Wenrisero awoke, sprawled at the feet of the hill giant king, the smell of blood and rotting flesh thick in the air. Brohk admired the noble's morbid attire, his massive clubbed fingers gently inspecting the tooth necklace. Brohk confessed his own hatred for giant kind, offering Wenrisero more than just freedom to pursue his own vices, but to finally get back at the giants which have wronged him. Wenrisero has never been one to pass up on an opportunity, and this one just might be his biggest one yet. For Wenrisero's design, we went back and forth on how outwardly menacing we wanted him to look. We toyed around with the idea of a design that was totally unassuming and joyous looking, but in the end we landed on this more arrogant appearance, as if to say, do something about it. His clothing design incorporates giant parts like fire giant hatchling tails, frost giant leather, naturally made cloud giant materials. In the end, his design came together to look somewhat like a bunch of organ meat, lungs, intestines, and blood. Still looking elegant and noble, but disgusting, which Lee thought was really cool. Wenrisero is an arrogant deviant whose pleasures have no price tag. He savors his new role as a corrupter of the weak among Brock's army. The elf still resides within Sardanis, more emboldened than ever by his king's aggressive tactics. Despite the severe shortage of imports and exports through the capital's harbor, the Moon Willow has never been busier. Nobles across the city looking for anything to get away from the doom and gloom beyond the walls. Such desperate, strained minds are easy to break. These 3 warlocks, all from wildly different backgrounds, have found themselves consumed by the same bloodthirsty pact. But how might that look like in an actual game of D&D? This next section of the video will go over the Pact of the Hunger subclass, warlocks who sap the life force from their foes to bolster their own defenses, and provide you with the opportunity to play as a member of Brohk's ravenous cult yourself. As a Pact of the Hunger warlock, you have formed a bond with a greater being of insatiable appetites. Such creatures revel in unrestrained greed, thirsting for the taste of delicacies like blood, pain, magic, food, gold, and knowledge. While the nature of your patron's urges may vary, all will demand their vices in excess. You serve as one of these creatures' vessels on the material plane, tasked to succumb to the hungers and divulge in the pleasures of flesh and mind in their absence. Should you satisfy their cravings, and influence others to do the same, they shall gladly grant power. Beings of this type include Yinagu, Demon Prince of Gnolls, Gratzt, Demon Prince of Decadence, and Brohk, King of the Hill Giants. Just like all warlocks, at first level the Hunger lets you choose from an expanded spell list. The first spell level is Absorb and Expel and Detect Magic. The second is Zone of Truth and Enhance Ability. The third is Bestow Curse and Lifebind. The fourth is Compulsion and Indulge. And the fifth is Gias and Contagion. You might notice 3 of these spells are highlighted in red. These are new spells, ones for other classes that this warlock in specific gets access to. Let's go over them very briefly. Absorb and Expel is a first level spell for bards, clerics, druids, sorcerers, and wizards. You could reduce the incoming damage from an ability. On your next turn, you can use a bonus action to release the absorbed damage in a 15-foot cone. Those creatures in the affected area make a dex saving throw, taking the full damage on a failed save or half as much on a successful one. Casting the spell at higher levels allows you to absorb, and therefore expel, more damage. This next spell is Lifebind, a level 3 spell for clerics, druids, paladins, and rangers. This spell binds the life force of you and another willing creature. If either of these targets bound by the spell receive healing, the other target receives half of that healing. Additionally, if one of the 2 targets drops to 0 hit points, the other target takes 2d8 necrotic damage. That damage then being given to the fallen target as healing. If for whatever reason this damage were to reduce a creature to 0 health, they're instead reduced to 1 hit point. The spell then ends. The spell ends early if you and the target become separated by more than 90 feet, if either one of these targets has the spell casted on them again, or you dismiss it as an action. The final spell on this spell list is Indulge, a 4th level enchantment spell for bards, clerics, druids, and sorcerers. You reach deep into the untapped desires of up to 5 creatures of your choice, offering them the opportunity to indulge. Choose one of the following effects. Those 5 creatures gain the effect. Indulging in Feast provides temporary hit points and advantage against poison and resistance to poison damage. Indulging in Knowledge allows you to share proficiency bonuses. Provides advantage on intelligence checks if another creature has already attempted it. You can also telepathically communicate information between one another. Indulging in Revelry makes you immune to being charmed or frightened, and you get advantage on charisma saves as long as you're near another creature affected by this spell. You also take reduced damage every time you're hit. Indulging in Risk increases your speed by 10 feet, gives you bonuses to your armor class, and attacks of opportunity are made with disadvantage against you. Additionally, you can't be surprised. At first level as a Pact of the Hunger warlock, you gain access to the feature Life Tap. You can make a spell attack against a creature within 30 feet, dealing 2d4 plus your warlock level and necrotic damage, and gaining temporary hit points equal to that damage dealt. Additionally, whenever you gain temporary hit points through subclass features, you gain armor class equivalent to your proficiency bonus. At 6th level, you get the feature Spell Siphon. Once you successfully hit a creature that can cast spells, you can use a bonus action to harvest some of their magical energy, regaining a Warlock spell slot. That creature then makes a Wisdom saving throw, being prevented from casting spells if they fail it. At 10th level, you learn the feature Excess Offerings. You can perform a sacrifice, casting the spell Divination without expending a spell slot. The spell functions as it does normally, but your patron also alludes to an additional way of appeasing them in the future. Once you complete the spell, you gain temporary hit points equal to your Warlock level. If at any point on your travels you appease your patron a second time through the way they alluded to, you immediately regain these temporary hit points again. Finally, at 14th level, you gain the feature Ravenous Link. As an action, you can make a magic spell attack on a creature within 60 feet. If you hit them, you're now linked. Every instance of damage that creature receives, they take an additional 1d4 plus your charisma modifier necrotic damage, and you're healed for half the amount of the damage taken. The feature ends if you use your action to do anything else, if the target ever leaves the 60-foot range or has total cover from you. These have been Brohk's followers. As always, thank you for watching. If you made it this far, tell us in the comments how you would make a Pact of the Hunger Warlock, or a Brohk follower for a D&D game set place in Theranor. I want to take a moment to give a special thank you to our incredible patrons of all tiers for supporting us through the creation of this project. For our Smallfolk patrons, we have Lost Jungle Girl, DFlame143, Muffin Man, and Kai Gould. As for our Giantkin patrons, we have Ethan Boyd, Tatara, Derek J346, and Art Rager. And finally, for our True Giant patrons, we have Jake Bullock, Robert Garcia, Juan Mora, Captain Wooly, and Kurt Rose. Our Patreon will be linked below, and it features early looks at certain designs and ideas, early video releases, polls, and more. Thank you again for watching. See you in the next one.